modern science try to start to confirm ancient knowledge. So here's Dr. Robert Harrington, and basically a lot of his information and the star charts and things that he had plotted where he thought this planet X would be sighted are still available in the Harvard Astronomical Abstracts, and you can download these, and other astronomers could look at them and start with his research and kind of go along that lines. Now, since Dr. Robert Harrington's research, there's been a lot of new ways to look for the idea of an extrasolar planet. And originally he had thought that there were perturbations, as the term was used, on the outer planets. The planets seemed like they were being pulled in a certain way. So Dr. Harrington suggested there could be another large body causing these influences. We don't quite use the perturbation method anymore. And I'm sure Dr. Tom Van Flandern will be able to fill us in on some of this. But there's a whole new array of planet finding that they don't actually use just solely math anymore to look at the perturbations and wobbles of the planets. So most recently, just actually last month, a very interesting astronomer named Dr. Takashi Mukai out of Kobe University in Japan released, wouldn't you know it, an orbital model for a very highly elliptical planet that's a part of our solar system. So every time one of these mainstream astronomers comes out and prognosticates the idea that there is another body in our solar system or this type of research deserves more study, the mainstream science is quickly to be like, oh, no, it's not there, it couldn't be. And where I have a discrepancy is that all the things that they've been citing for a planet X in the last 10 years, Sedna, Quoar, Xena, no. These are all little ice balls floating around out there. The planet we're talking about, cited by the ancient cultures as well, that does exist, is 4 to 8 times the size of Earth. Big planet. Not something you can miss, and not something that's going to be a little floating ice ball beyond Pluto. So if we do find this planet, it'll be very interesting to collaborate with a lot of these findings that have been happening and coming out over the years here. And just recently, I think the date on this article here is August 12th or something, but large planet X may lurk beyond Pluto. So this research is still mainstream cutting edge right now for the idea that it's pushing the envelope of astronomy and trying to pierce through the veil of understandings that, they wanted to try and demote Pluto to not being a planet. Well, why don't we just stick to what we have and kind of be a little bit more open-minded to the idea that not everything we think is in place is. So where this turns for my personal interest is the fact that, again, what I'm going to now show you is there's a bunch of ancient knowledge coming from sources that can be verified, artifacts, tablets, and things that we have evidence from ancient cultures that are very astute astronomically that tell us there's another planet in our solar system. And not only is there another planet in our solar system, but there's beings that live on that planet. So there's a very infamous author named Zecharia Sitchin. He's wrote a series of books called the Earth Chronicles, over 50 years of research. Zecharia Sitchin's a linguist, studies ancient languages, is one of about 220 people in the world that can actually translate Sumerian cuneiform script directly. And so he's wrote a series of books mainly focusing on the Sumerian legacy of information and how that it's filtered into all the other cultures. Now, why Zecharia Sitchin really caught my attention with archaeology and ancient cultures, all the other linguists or archaeologists out there will focus on one artifact, or the linguists will focus on one word, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, but they don't put it into a bigger context of what it all means. What are they doing? What does this mean? And so there's always going to be discrepancies in the mainstream community for the accepted explanations or definitions of a lot of the things I'm going to show you. Now, the reason why I stick with Sitchin is because he puts it in an overall context. He's not just debating the word Nephilim. He's putting into an overall context of what they were, what they meant, and it's not just in one language. It spans many languages. So what I'm going to do is focus on one culture specifically, kind of where all this originally started, and that's Sumer, modern-day Iraq. 6,000 years ago, we have a culture that comes up right out of the Stone Age called Sumer. Eventually it became Mesopotamia, Babylon, and it's today's Iraq. So this fertile strip of land here called Mesopotamia, right between the Tigris and Euphrates River, has some very interesting properties for the artifacts that we've been pulling out. Now, in the late 1800s, a person with the British Museum was doing excavations most of the artifacts that have been found in Iraq are all stored in the British Museum, and you can visit them there and see it. He pulled out a tablet, which I'll show you here in a minute. He pulled out a tablet that in stone on this ancient cuneiform script. Again, this is 1890, around there. It starts to talk about how a Sumerian god chose a Sumerian man, in cuneiform script, mind you, 6,000-year-old stone tablet, to build an ark, to build a big boat, because there's going to be a flood. There's going to be a great excess of water as their planet comes by. So there's this Sumerian tale, which literally word for word is the Noah's Ark tale, but it's 2,000 years removed from the time of the Hebrew God, of Abraham, or any time, of Jesus and like a Noah in that time frame in the Christian Bible. This is a Sumerian tale that's 2,000 years removed from any other version of a biblical Noah's Ark tale. So it could be, for all intents and purposes, the original. So in a lot of these other stone tablets that discuss biblical tales, which we can find an iteration of a biblical tale in the Sumerian form, unchanged in stone, have a lot of parallels to modern biblical tales. Things about Genesis. The Bible talks about a time when there were giants upon the earth. Well, the Sumerians talked about living amongst their beings, or their gods, the Anunnaki. They said that they lived amongst these beings and had day-to-day interactions with them. So a lot of the things that they recorded on these things, which this here is it's basically a stone tablet. They used something that was a round stone cylinder seal, and it had a reverse carved imprint, like a reverse image. And then we'd roll this positive image over wet clay, leaving the imprint, and would fire in a kiln, making it in stone. So they left us hundreds of thousands of these tablets, which show all types of various pieces of information. And this one, you can see here, actually has a little description from the British Museum describing like what you're seeing here. And what's interesting is that if you look here real closely, you'll see these 7 dots, and you'll see this winged disc here in a little crescent shape. These are all astronomical symbols. Now, in the British Museum, these 7 dots are being represented as the 7 sisters of Pleiades, the Pleiades constellation. Sitchin says, no, that's not Pleiades. That's Earth. The 7 dots representing Earth, because we are on the 7th planet. When the Anunnaki came here, they said, you're on the 7th planet. I'll show you what I mean here in a second. So if you look at all the planets here, if you're starting at Pluto and you go in, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Key, the sacred number 7, 7 days in a week, 7 tablets of creation, 7 days of Genesis. The Sumerians were told by the Anunnaki, when we came into your solar system, you were on the 7th planet. Now the hip term we hear is the 3rd rock from the sun, but no, actually coming into our solar system, Earth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is the 7th planet. So a lot of this information comes out from the Sumerian details about astronomical pieces of our solar system, the distance between the planets, what the planets look like in space. And we can test this information because over time we've sent probes out there, Galileo and Voyager, and they took measurements of the outer planets for the first time, seeing the planets in color. And sure enough, they matched the Sumerian descriptions from 6,000 years ago of Mosh Sieg, Uranus being a greenish-blue planet. They had accurate descriptions of the distance between the planets. But where the discrepancy came up is that, you see, in the early 1900s, we're pulling out Sumerian tablets talking about outer planets, the distance between the planets. Pluto wasn't discovered until 1930. So in the early 1900s, all these things about Anunnaki, these winged beings, what kind of look like angels, or distance between the planets, was all thrown into a big myth pile and left untouched, basically, by modern astronomy and sciences. So a lot of the information that starts to kind of raise the eyebrow, just from a layman's point of view about the Sumerian information, is that we know that from the time of Copernicus and Galileo, man thought that we were the center of the universe. That basically, everything orbited us, until we became smart enough to realize that that's not the case, that we orbit the sun. Well, interestingly enough, the Sumerians noted our planet's structure correctly on a tablet that's 6,000 years old. Here you have a scene where the god is granting to man the plow, modern agriculture. But as a backdrop to this cylinder seal, you see here a complete model of our solar system with the sun in the center and all the little planets that we know of correctly displayed. Now, how could they know that the sun was in the center of the solar system? We didn't know this until we started using mathematical calculations and telescopes to say, wow, we actually are orbiting the sun. So they had this down correctly right out of the Stone Age. Who taught them? How did they know this? Here's an interesting tablet. Another thing is that they didn't think the ancient people were familiar with the shape of an ellipse, like a wheel. Here it is, a circular tablet. Now, interestingly enough, on this tablet, this little portion here, even though it's badly damaged, this little portion alone was translated by Zacharias Sitchin, and you can see it has some very interesting information. What it translates to basically talk about is the path that the Anunnaki god Enlil took to get from Nibiru to Earth, and he would have to make course corrections. So here, the term for this was Nibiru. You can see the lists here the names of the planets, and it talks about here when God Enlil went by the planets. You can even see here on the side the text is like rocket, rocket, mountain, mountain, pile up, high, high, high. What is this doing in a 6,000-year-old culture? So a lot of the other things that they left us that we can pinpoint to say, wow, they are on it. They left us astronomical information in texts, sacred texts that were handed down over hundreds of years. They could predict on what day, 50 years in advance, a lunar eclipse was going to take place. They tracked the orbit of planets over hundreds of years and followed their orbits in the sky. So they were very astute astronomers. And the information that they tell us about another planet in our solar system, beings living on this planet, our science hasn't yet been able to confirm that. But after 1 or 2 or 100 coincidences, which I'm going to show you here, you have to start to wonder, like, well, wait a minute, what's really going on? How could they have known all this information? This one, again, just shows documentation of observation of the stars over hundreds of years, just showing you just various tablets. These are stored in the British Museum. Some are in Turkey. This one, just various Sumerian cuneiform script, sometimes also done on precious stones or like granite. But you can see the detail of some of these things. It's very interesting. Now, this one is a very interesting seal because you can see here in the sky there's a glowing cross, or there's a cross depicted in the sky. Now, that's the actual symbol the Sumerians described for Nibiru. Nibiru stood for planet of the crossing, and they symbolized this very early on as a glowing cross in the sky of where their gods came from, way before Christianity and Jesus on the cross. So they actually had little descriptions and cylinder seals to denote Nibiru. Now, originally, Nibiru was in the form of a cross, and here's a cylinder seal imprint. This is from Zacharias Sitchin's books from the Earth Chronicles, and you can see here they're plowing a field, the sun, and in daylight they're looking up at awe at that glowing cross in the sky. The glowing cross eventually is transversed into other cultures as the winged disc. And we can see this showing up in I don't know what this means here, but I understand the symbology being shown. Through Sitchin's research, what we're looking at here is Earth, the 7 dots of Earth, and its crescent moon, and Nibiru, a glowing cross. So that was a symbolic seal that they were using, and you'll see these symbols over and over again for the representations of the planets, the idea that the heavens were divided up into 12 parts, the zodiac, that's a Sumerian first, the divisional of the heavens into 12 parts. So a lot of this information and the math that's displayed, we'll talk about that number 12 too in a minute, is just very interesting. This tablet I find just unbelievable. It's basically telling part of a story, a much longer story of an epic of Gilgamesh, and it's a form of the epic of creation that we have in the Bible, like Genesis and the 7 days of creation. Well, this tells a much more, this is on 11 tablets, and it's a much more detailed understanding and explanation about how Earth came to be and how we show up on Earth. So there is a Sumerian tale in this Epic of Gilgamesh, and also in the Enuma Elish, it's another version of the sacred text, that talks about how in the very early on of our solar system, before the planets had become solid masses, another planet appears, and they called it an intruder planet. And they said that this planet was attracted by the inner part of our solar system and got sucked into the inner part of our solar system, and in doing so, when it passed by Jupiter and got by the inner planets, it had this interaction with our now Earth, was then called Tiamat. It didn't hit our planet, but the moon of planet X whacked our primitive Earth, then called Tiamat, so hard, the Sumerians say, that that's what strewed out the asteroid belt, that initial collision, and it put Earth in its new orbit where it is now. So if you look at the solar system model that we have now, and that's the orbit now planet X or Nibiru now takes, is a very elliptical orbit around the sun. Let me back up for a second. it's an interesting thing to note, and I think I have a model of this in a second, but the distance between all the planets where they have free room to freely rotate, right between Mars and Jupiter, we have the asteroid belt. Now that strip of where there's just debris, there's clearly enough room for another large planet to have once passed and have an orbit there. So we'll look at that here in a second. But this is another thing that came out in the science a couple of years ago. I'm not even sure if Tom's familiar with this. Probably is, though, because he's so on top of it. I'm going back. Excuse me. There was another theory that just came out called the Orpheus theory. And there was just some NASA planetary science model to suggest that, let's see if I can get that to play. Forgive me here, folks. My personal confuser. I'll let that go for a minute. Maybe it's just going to start playing. Sure. Make it difficult for me. Okay, so this was just another animation, a science model that showed astronomy was predicting that there would be another large planet in our past called Orpheus, and that it passed so close to Earth that at one of its passes, it actually could have had a collision, an impact. And that's what strewed out the fragments that then coalesced to make our moon. Kind of close to Nibiru, kind of close to the idea of what the Sumerians are saying, but I found this a very interesting theory in modern science to suggest a large rogue planet entering our solar system and having dramatic effects. And if there was ever to be a large dramatic event, you can see that Earth being whacked into half a planet would just be kind of a chunk. It wouldn't be a large circular, planet like we see now. So a very interesting correlation is the idea that we hear of Pangea. If Earth was half a planet, originally, like Pangea states, it would just been one chunk of land. But water in its planetary form siphons into a sphere, so the water on our planet just filled in the large gaps in the Pacific Basin. But over time, like the skin of an apple, it's all come undone to be where it is. And we've proven this, that's possibly the idea, that if you look at all the continents, they seem to fit, that at some point it was all connected. That also supports the idea that Earth was just a half a planet. And then over time, it's become, taking the shape that it is. So just very interesting correlations of the Sumerian information. Here's that diagram I was going to discuss. If you look between here, the orbit, the amount of distance for the other planets, there's clearly enough room for another planet to have orbited there. This is an interesting breakdown of math that I show that several years back there were rumors, and of course now they're pinpointing 2012, it's not going to happen, that in 2003 Planet X was going to come back by and kill us or cause these gravitational effects like it has in the past. Well, just from a simple mathematical thing here, you can see a breakdown. We're looking at the initial time when the Sumerians described that this intruder planet got sucked in. It's kind of around the time when the planets had just finished coalescing. That's roughly 4.7 billion years ago. Nibiru goes around the sun roughly once every 3,600 years. The Sumerians actually had a symbol for that. It was called a shar, and they gave the first complete circle as 3,600 years, which also comes down to 360 degrees of the circle, another Sumerian first. But if you just do a simple math saying, okay, it goes around the sun 3,600 years, so 3,600 divided by 4.7 billion, that means that it's been going, it's already orbited through our inner part of the solar system over 1 million times. So maybe it's not always going to cause gravitational effects when it does pass by. And that's the next question, of course, as everyone's wondering is, will we see a Nibiru or Planet X in our lifetime? Maybe some of you saw Comet Hale-Bopp. I did. Tripped me out seeing that large comet in the sky. So I don't think an astronomical event with a planet that's 4 to 8 times the size of Earth would ever be able to be covered up. The amateur community was always much more astute even than the professionals of finding things. Shoemaker-Levy 9, Hale-Bopp. So I have faith. However, that's not to say that there aren't threats from space, because as you can guess, this would not be a very good day. So I do put merit in the idea that it is at least acceptable to be aware of what's going on in the solar system. Everyone has their jobs and their family to worry about. And we've seen things like Armageddon or Deep Impact in the media, but the professional community like NASA, they don't give us quite the full picture. When this happened, Shoemaker-Levy 9 broke up into 9 fragments and impaled Jupiter with such force, NASA said, it's going to be nothing. Don't even worry about it. Don't look. Nothing. Those little dark spots you see, those are all the sizes. You could fit an Earth in each one of those. So those are huge. And to say that that was an event that, you know, we shouldn't be paying attention to, I disagree. And so we have information all throughout history, the idea that, you know, large comets and debris maybe took out the dinosaurs, something whacked the Yucatan Peninsula, caused these great devastations. And that would be a pretty dramatic event. Now, if there is a Planet X or an Nibiru, and it does come into the inner part of our solar system, this being such a large body is going to have comets and debris following it, and that stuff is what we would have to be worried about. That stuff could whack us. And we've seen these things kind of getting on the radar of the public eye for Deep Impact, Armageddon, just kind of opening the idea that, hey, there could be something in our future that you might want to at least have a mental preparation for, like, okay, this is what's going down. So there's another interesting research that came out from a professor named Dr. Richard Mueller out of Berkeley, and he theorized nemesis. Now, his research basically pinpoints the idea that we have another asteroid belt way far on the fringes of our solar system called the Oort cloud, and that he postulates that there is another failed sun that's orbiting, there's another planet orbiting our failed sun. Now, his model predicted that these extinction level events that happen over millions of years, like why the dinosaurs were taken out, were caused by the dislodging of debris and comets by nemesis that hurl it all towards the inner part of our solar system. Why I think this is interesting again. Now, we didn't know until Hubble and various other imaging, developments